Before we get started, I'd like to take some time to acknowledge our traditional lands. I'm tuning in from my home, but we acknowledge that our campus and where I'm located are the traditional lands of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees, and the Esquimalt nations. We're always deeply grateful to be here. This is where we live, learn, work, and play, and we really honor the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, staff, and faculty. So again, super grateful that you all could be here with us today. Okay, and while we're here today, we have a wonderful session for you, Building the Future, Open, Flexible, and Human-Centered Education. I really love that title. We have some wonderful guests here today. I'm joined by Dr. Elizabeth Child, who's a professor and the program head for the Mallet program at the MA in Learning and Technology. Nice to see you, Elizabeth. Hello. And also pleased to be joined by Mary Burgess, who's an associate faculty. Also Anne-Marie Scott, who's an associate faculty and the vice president of the Commonwealth of Learning. My name's Ariana. I'm an education specialist here at Rural Roads, and delighted to be with you. Okay, and an agenda here just before we get started. I'll give us a brief overview of the Rural Roads University experience, just in case you're not familiar with us yet. We'll have our wonderful discussion, and then we'll just go into a few details, how to apply if you're thinking of applying for our programs at all. And then we'll have some questions. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to post them in the chat kind of as we move along too. Okay, and if you're considering rural roads, I just want to give you a few statistics here, and then I'll follow up with a few little points about our campus. So if you're considering coming to rural roads, we have some statistics from our alumni survey. So 93% of our alumni say that rural roads has positively influenced their personal and professional lives. 92% say that they felt supported by staff and faculty here at Rural Roads. 90% say that Rural Roads provided them with the tools and knowledge required for a leadership role in the workplace. And also 89% say that we provided them with the tools and knowledge needed to be innovative in the workplace. And we have some photos of our beautiful campus as well. You'll see to the top left, this is a photo of Hatley Castle. This has been a famous movie set that's been used in films like X-Men and Deadpool. There's a big long list of films that have been shot here. We also have a variety of gardens and green space. You'll see just to the right of that, we have a photo of our Japanese garden, looking very beautiful in bloom. We have a migratory bird sanctuary as well. This is one of my favorite places. You'll see just to the bottom left of that. And we've been doing online and blended learning styles as well here at Rural Roads for 30 years. We used to say 25, but now it's 30 years here, and we're very proud of that as well. We're also proud to be an Ashoka U certified Changemaker campus. We're actually only one of 5 in Canada that's with that certification. And this is an innovative approach that really prepares students as they address world problems, encourage others, and act for the good of all. And I just want to take a moment as well to touch on our MA in Learning and Technology at Rural Roads. If you've been considering that program or any of our programs, really, it's a 2-year program that's fully online, also textbook free, which is very cool. We'll touch on this a little bit kind of as we move throughout the session as well. MA in Learning and Technology also has open education practices with networked learning. You can choose from a thesis, applied research project, or digital learning research consulting project. It's also approved by the Teacher Qualification Service and the Institute for Performance and Learning. Okay, and at this point, I will pass it off to my wonderful co-host, Elizabeth. I invite you to take it away here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ariana. And thanks everyone for making time in your afternoon or wherever this time zone might find you. I really appreciate you joining the conversation. This is really going to be a conversation today, so we're not going to run through slide decks. Ariana did that. Thank you very well, but really meant to be a conversation as we explore the topic in question. Before we do, and before I turn it over to Mary and Anne-Marie to introduce themselves, I would just like to take a moment for all of us who've probably come from either a million meetings or a million Zoom boxes to just have a collective breath. So don't worry, I'll guide you through it. It's not too freaky. We'll just take a moment, put your feet on the ground, shake your arms out, roll your shoulders, and just ground yourself in your space. Take a nice deep breath in, get full of all that oxygen-enriched air so your brain can fire again. And a lovely, long, luxurious exhale out. Thank you. Thanks for taking space for that. I'm joining you today from the Lekwungen speaking peoples territory, unceded territory, and I'm really uh, reminded, as Ariana put that picture up in the bottom left, there was Blue Heron House or Snoqualin, and it's one of our places on campus that just has this very special energy around it. It's one of the places where people would come from away as we work with our Blue Heron elders to learn more. And they would ask permission to come onto the land. And there were protocols that they followed to do that. And then they would share knowledge and learnings and teaching and gifts and food and all of the things you do. And then they would leave to take those gifts elsewhere with them. And so as we work in these little Zoom boxes and in these online spaces, one of the things that really connects from that with me is this notion of, so who has come before us and how can we give them thanks for what they have allowed us to come together to do today? And then who will go after us and what can we do as we co-create these spaces that will allow them to raise their hands in thanks for the work that's been done? So welcome to all of you. I am now going to turn it over to Mary to introduce herself, and then she'll turn it over to Anne-Marie, and then we'll kind of get into this flowy conversation for a bit.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and Ariana. Thank you also. I really like being part of these. It's just, I was saying to Anne Marie and Elizabeth how fun it is to just get together and noodle over the stuff that we all are really interested in education. And so I'm happy to get the chance to do that. So I am on what's now known as Victoria, British Columbia, on the traditional unceded territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And that actually, what you were saying before about thinking about what's come before us, that notion is really grounding for me in my learning about what's coming in the future and all of those sort of new things that fly around. And so having that grounding and taking that breath is a really way to engage with some of these big concepts that are sometimes challenging to think about. But if we sort of ground ourselves first, then that can be really helpful. And I love it because it's also a practice that we use in the course that I teach, which is LRNT 528, Facilitating in Digital Environments, Digital Learning Environments. And the course is really about being exposed to literature, thinking, research, evidence that helps us understand how to create learning environments online that welcome learning, that invite learning, that make students feel like their presence is reflected in the course. And so we start out looking at those sort of the pieces that have come before us in terms of the research and what other folks have done in digital facilitation. And then students move to facilitating themselves for each other. And that experience, it's really funny because students will come into the course and say how anxious it makes them to think about doing that. But by the time they've gotten through the learning and thinking about things more deeply and thinking about their own context, that facilitation becomes something that really opens their eyes to what they're capable of, as well as what really makes a learning experience good or not so good, and reflecting on each of the individual elements of putting together a learning experience and how important intentionality is around doing that and thinking about what do I want them to do and feel and think when they're in this space with me. I just finished marking the final papers for the course, and every time I do that, I get this reminder of that flow through of learning and the massive skill boost that happens and the ways of thinking about how people can learn online and how to create those spaces. Every time it kind of floors me at what that learning has looked like and how reflective folks are, particularly about their own context, because people who are coming to this course to learn have very different backgrounds than I do. My facilitation is in post-secondary education, but theirs might be that they're a learning and development manager for an accounting firm or a K-12 teacher. And so bringing all of those pieces together into that relevant piece for helping them understand how to create inclusive and effective learning environments online is really something that I just love doing it. And just to back that up to the grounding, I've spent about the last 2 decades working in mostly leadership roles in organizations and initiatives and projects that were about creating inclusive learning environments, accessible learning environments, and finding ways of inviting people in instead of putting up the walls of this is my stuff and you can't have it if we're not learning together. So yeah, so that's, I will just say those are the things that I love about my course and how I kind of came to be doing this work. And now I will pass it over to Anne Marie.
Thank you, Mary. And I am Anne-Marie Scott. I teach on LRNT 526, Critical Inquiry into Contemporary Issues in Learning Technology. And as Elizabeth kindly said at the start of this conversation, I'm the vice president of an organization called Commonwealth of Learning, but much like Mary, I have a long history in post-secondary education in Canada, and prior to that in Scotland. Some of you will notice the accent, the gentle, soft Scottish brogue. But I came into teaching on that course originally through doing a guest lecture on it when it was taught by the late Erwin de Vries, because, and this speaks to what I love in the course as well. It's really an opportunity within the program to think about how you really bring theory into practice. And I know that flows through many parts of the program, but in the very specific context of learning technology, my background has been in implementing learning technologies and supporting the rollout and the development and the use of learning technologies at all sorts of different sizes and scales. And now the work that I do in Commonwealth of Learning across 56 countries in many different parts of education systems. And there is a huge change management component in that. And so what I love about this course and teaching this course now and lecturing on it before, doing a guest talk on it before, is that opportunity to bring that practical perspective in and kind of explain why this course is important as a practitioner. And so to give a little background on what the course does, we take learning technology, we take a particular learning technology and an instance of its use, and we then blow it open and go beyond thinking about pedagogical theory. And we start thinking about the kind of sociological context that all technology sits within, the economic, the political, the cultural. And why I think this is so important is all of my practical work experience in working with technology and learning contexts is about change management. It's very much about bringing people into a mode of learning and a way of learning that they haven't had experience with before, or supporting educators to move into doing something different in ways that can be quite challenging sometimes. And I don't think, I used to have to spell this out, and I don't think I need to spell it out in the same way. Technology is a bit political. Like I feel like that's sort of obvious in this moment right now when we look at the world around us. But it's always been part of a political and financial economy. And so, really thinking about what drives technology beyond the learning needs that we have for using technology. Who else has a vested interest here? And what does that do to our education systems? What does that do to the educational experience? And how do we make decisions thinking about that bigger context? So it's really an opportunity to blow open educational technology, to get beyond theory, to think about that bigger context, and then to bring it all together in the work that we do in that course, and particularly in the final paper, to really bring it all together and to bring together past theory that students have worked with in prior courses, but bring that to bear in the bigger context. It's not enough to just think about whether a technology is effective for learning. You've got to think about these other aspects as well. And it takes you into ethical spaces, it takes you into cultural spaces, and it can go in so many different directions. As Mary said, the breadth of contexts and experiences that students bring to the program and to each of these courses is what brings them alive. It's the conversations that we have between each other about the places in which we're working. It could be a highly regulated learning environment. It could be a First Nations adult learning centre. It could be all sorts of different places. And the richness that brings to the conversation is what I love about teaching on this program, because I think I learn as much from teaching on this program and those conversations and the insights that we get to as we explore whatever it is, whatever chosen technology students want to. It's an incredibly rich and rewarding experience for me as a practitioner, an educator. So yeah, I could go on about it.
I know. I'm thinking
about
actually
how
we
much
should
I
do
love
another.
it, but I'll stop there and pass back to Elizabeth before this just descends into
We should
love
do
fest.
another webinar where we just sort of highlight each of the faculty, because it's lovely to hear that story of how, I mean, I get this oversight, but you live it, you breathe it, you work with students, and so getting that depth is really, it's exciting for me. It's very exciting. So you can see, hopefully, folks that have joined and folks that might listen on the recording, you can see why we wanted to bring Mary and Anne-Marie in here to have this conversation about building the future, open, flexible, and human-centered education. So, just a small task, no big deal, really. When we met, the three of us met on Monday just to kind of, brainstorm and get some of that initial half-baked thinking out there. And we talked about things like inclusive design. We talked about global perspectives. We talked about having people at the center. And then we kind of landed on this question that I'm going to pose now, and we can just start to jump in on it. And if any of you would like to also comment, please do so in the chat. I mean, this doesn't have to be a complete fishbowl where you just watch us. You can absolutely engage as well. So we landed on this question of, what do we mean when we say open in the context of building the future? So, Anne-Marie, Mary, who wants to jump in on that one at the beginning?
Mary, you go first.
Okay, I will. I will. Thank you. Yeah, and our conversation on Monday was so great because it sparked all these other ideas about it, right? So that was wonderful. I think when I boil it down, to me, openness is a stance, it's a position, it's a way of thinking about my work as an educator. And I often think about it as sort of a comparison to another way of being as an educator, which is sort of the classic ivory tower. I own the knowledge. I will examine you on the knowledge, but I am the knowledge holder. And things like having to buy an expensive textbook that's filled with knowledge that is stuff that lots and lots of people already know, right? And so sort of those gatekeeping methodologies of learning are what draws me to open, and wanting to do everything I can to really reduce barriers to accessing education, and also accessing education that includes human beings as their full selves. And so yeah, maybe I'll stop there, but that's sort of my initial thinking on it. Is it's an ethos. It's a way of being as an educator.
Thank you. And I mean, I wish I could just say exactly the same things as you just said there, because I think we come to it with that same positionality. When you look for definitions of open education, there's about 1 million of them. I think it's Catherine Cronin that says, they're continually being renegotiated and they're highly contextual. And that's because it is at one level, a set of licenses and some open stuff. And at another level, as you say, a whole way of thinking about what education is and who it's for and who is included and what kind of agency people have. So that open stance and that focus on inclusion, and for me, agency as well, is the key. And in the work I now do at Commonwealth of Learning, We are working in well, 56 countries of the world, but largely in the lower developed nations of the Commonwealth. And open is innovation. Open is how you enable access to education and inclusion in education systems, because the need is so large and the resources are so limited that traditional models of education are just not going to get us there. They're just not going to get us there in time. So open is also the radical innovation that we can use to empower hundreds, millions of people. And that's an exciting possibility. And that looks different in many different places. It can be OER and textbooks and resources that can be localized or generated locally. It can be infrastructures. It can be how we collaborate and work together and share across countries, across regions. It's such a powerful toolkit for, as you said, Mary, inclusion, equity, access, agency, human flourishing.
Well, and I think that like ditto, right? And initially open was often just pushed as free. Isn't this great? It should be free. Everyone should be able to do this. I'm a taxpayer. This was created with my money. So why don't we share it more broadly? And so that there is absolutely a point to be made in that position. And then we kind of got into, okay, well, what about open pedagogy? What about the values that underpin this work? And now we're finding ourselves a little bit constrained in that space because we have this lovely companion called generative AI, which is introducing another disruption in this space. And I think one of the things that, from a design thinking standpoint and that kind of approach to this, I love these invitations of generative AI or of the next disruption, because you need constraints in design to iterate, right? By and large, I can stand corrected, but by and large, most people iterate to make things better. They're not trying to make them worse when they, riff on something. And so being able to have this interesting constraints at play causes us to think a little bit differently about open. So I had the privilege to be at the Open Ed conference last week virtually, and Brenna Clark-Gray, who also is associate faculty in our program, did an amazing presentation where she really took the 5 R's of open, and I'll put some links in the chat for those of you where this might be new, and she turned them on their head. And talked about what does open mean now in this age of authoritarianism. And I'm wondering if we want to talk a little bit about that. When we think about holding up inclusion, when we think about holding up, in your world right now, Anne-Marie, this large 56 countries of populations that have never, in many cases, have had access to formal education or very rudimentary formal education. What is the shift that you're seeing now in these spaces? And I'm just going to put some links in the chat while you ponder that question.
Wow, that's a huge question.
Sorry.
I think the first thing I would do is kind of wind back to some kind of basic definitions here, and some of the work I do is very much in the open source software space. I'm also on the board of the OSI, think about licensing in open source software. And one of the things we've been doing over the last few years is developing an open source AI definition. All open source software licenses are built on top of a definition of what open source software is that's nearly 30 years old now. And it's not sufficient for AI. AI is more than just software. And so we had to really think about, well, what would the definition of an open source AI be? An open source AI system. And we're at version 1 of that. It is imperfect. There is more work to do. This is a fast-paced and fast-changing space. But the reason that work is so important is back to that point about agency and about inclusion. Because I think today we are using generative AI as a shortcut, a shorthand for products. We say generative AI and we often mean ChatGPT. or we say AI and we mean generative AI, there are layers of a meaning in here. It is not the case that our AI future has to be dictated by a few small players. The possibility of generative AI by education for education is absolutely there, but it requires some of the infrastructure like licensing, and it requires money. It requires, I would say, a collaboration, some of the ethos of open that is about sharing and collaboration. It requires some sharing of resource as well. So I think about some of the work I've done in previous lives around shared services, some of the work I still do around shared services, where institutions come together, pool and share their resources to run their own services by themselves, for themselves. When I was at the University of Edinburgh, we were a reseller of educational software services to other parts of the education system. So open gives us some answers to that disruption as well, but we have to step back from a place that I think OECD countries have gone to more commonly, which is the buying of product, and start thinking about what open gives us to build and have for ourselves. So some of the work we are doing at Commonwealth of Learning is taking open source AI models, large language models, but not super large language models, things that can run on a MacBook, and building AI, generative AI education applications that can be used in offline, low power contexts. And I've seen work in, I think it was Brazil, some AI in education work on the boat schools in Brazil. So completely disconnected, one AI running on one of these and being used with a sort of paper in, paper out process. And I'll try and find some links for it because it's very cool stuff. It's not completely open, that work, but the point is that open gives us the potential to think about some of this stuff for ourselves and design some of it for ourselves if we want to do that. So to your point about constraints, Elizabeth, we can see, we can use this moment and some constraints thinking to start imagining what could we do at the level of what's possible and affordable for ourselves. And some of these early examples show us that some quite powerful things are possible and are affordable, and we don't need some of that, mega tech out there. So it doesn't have to be this way. I'm quite interested in what the idea of an AI commons might look like.
Yes, there was a bit of chatter and discussion around that last week, and I too was like, okay, the notion of the commons has always been sort of at the edges of the open space, some more than others, right? Influencing decisions, influencing how things could be done. And so taking that into this concept of an AI commons, I think, is a really interesting space to go. You made me think of the work that BC Campus is doing right now on their Open Gen AI project. And now, you and I are going to have to talk further because they are also experimenting with models that can be downloaded and run off of your machine for those very reasons. I mean, you don't have to go across the world to find settings where people do not have the infrastructure to run this stuff. It's in our backyard. And so being able to work in these spaces and understand their potential and their limitations, I think, is a really important part of this work. Mary, how do you see this intersecting with the lens that you bring, especially around like where we're thinking of neurodivergent learners and inclusivity? I mean, this is starting to talk, big and like we can change the world, which we can. I'm not going to say we can. Of course we can. And at the same time, the student today who's struggling and is finding an easy default, is that the future that we want to build in these human-centered spaces?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was sort of focusing, and so I'm going to be a little bit distracted because I have a cat who's just landed on my desk. So we're just going to pretend that's not happening right now because she's incredibly cute. So a lot of the work I do around disruption, I call compassionate disruption. And the reason for that is because I think change happens better when people feel seen in the change process. And so I think we can take a human-centered approach to looking at designing these tools, AI and others, but particularly if we're designing something for the commons, then we would want to be looking at not the usual KPIs and metrics, but how does this work for humans? Who are the humans? How have they been excluded previously? What are their experiences? What are they bringing to the table? Where can I meet them? And thinking about those kinds of things. Yeah. So I will. This is the piece of paper that has been on my desk for years. You can't read it anymore. It says, "Who are we leaving out?" Because that is the primary question always, because we are leaving out people all the time. As you talk about, there's a lot of people in the north of our country right now who do not have adequate internet access, and we are trying to build a just society while having people who can't access curriculum. And so that's sort of where I always am oriented to, is when we're building something, the critical analysis starts with, what's the human aspect of this? Who are the people who are going to be using it, and what do they need? And then go from there with all of the other pieces. So that's really, yeah, again, it's the ethos, right? And that's the ethos of open that isn't always visible when you're working with things just like an open textbook. Don't get me wrong, I still love open textbooks, but it is one very tiny microcosm of what the ethos is about. And so we want to look at it more broadly and in a human-centered way always, to make sure that we are building things that aren't just for me and my perspective, but that can be used by everybody, or can't be used by everybody, but we are saying specifically, this is for these people with this set of circumstances.
If I could jump in on that one, Mary, and I will find a link for this because it is super good. That example, I name checked the Brazilian boat school example of using AI. They had a really tight design framework, a really tight constraints-based design framework that really was very human-centered. So it started with, what's the literacy levels of the digital literacy levels of the teachers? Devices are expensive, so what's the minimal amount of technical infrastructure you can use? It's an offline context, it's a low power context, it's a paper heavy context. So using all of those as a set of design constraints, really grounding the solution in the material circumstances of that educational context, produced some really innovative uses of technology that were absolutely attuned to the needs of those people in that community, as opposed to a product which is kind of shipped in and retrofitted. And the example I saw was using AI, teachers using AI to I'm going to say mark, for want of a better way, assess students' writing skills. So students would do a writing exercise on paper, take a picture of it with the phone, the AI does what it does, and then it spits the result out of a printer, and then that goes back to the students. So really thinking very cleverly about the use of technology, but completely grounded in the material circumstances of that environment, nobody made to feel less than.
I love this, if only, because it is validating a little bit of practice that I used to do in the way backs, where, in working with Indigenous communities across Canada around lands management, the very first thing we did at every workshop when we were trying to figure out what would the training design be in that setting was to draw a big picture of a gingerbread person. And so like non-gender, big gingerbread and tall like me. And we would stick it on the wall or sometimes on the floor. And people would have post-it notes and have the ability to add in all the things that made up this collective person. And that was the starting point for design. And I think that is I'm sure there are other ways to do that now, but in my practice, that was definitely one of those aha moments for people where you had folks around the table looking at this gingerbread person with all of its stickies on it and reading for the first time, oh, I didn't know that, right? And so then you have those conversations about, who are we leaving out? Is it intentional? Why? If so, what can we do about that? How can we, find ways to be more inclusive on a wide range of issues, not just, can you access the technology? I think one of the other things, we talked a little bit about this on Monday, and I'm going to just pull this thread a bit, is that there's that at that program level, but then we also have systems and structures that are designed to leave people out. So we have a 4-year program. We have things that come in chunks, and sometimes those chunks are for the efficiency of an administrative calendar, as opposed to because the learner needs just enough just in time. And so I think there's room here when you start thinking about, this building for the future and an open and human-centered, much more voice of the human at the center around, what do I need and when do I need it? And oh, by the way, why do I need it? And so we often get stuck in the, here's what you need, here's why, and it's filled up with various rights holders who have a large body of wisdom around that topic. Absolutely. And then there is this piece of, yeah, but I'm, in our setting at Royal Roads, often our learners are juggling young families, aging parents. They're at that point in their career where they've got, they're right in the thick of it. They're not able to sort of step back and go, okay, I can take a day. And so are we, with the structures we have to play with, we are excluding people. And sometimes we're bending those structures to seem inclusive, but at the risk of mental health issues, at the risk of physical health issues, at the risk of just complete overload, because of the need to get this stamp that's a BA or an MA or whatever it is. So I'll stop talking now and let you take your nodding heads and jump in on that one.
This is such a good point. And as you're thinking, my thinking was like going along. Oh, yes, that piece, that piece, that piece. I think just to go back to the beginning of your statement about, and I think this is one of the things we talked about on Monday, is when we want to assimilate people into a particular way of thinking, here, come and take this 4-year degree. And we're not seeing those people as a diverse set of humans with experiences and reflections that they are bringing to the learning and that they need to have help contextualizing. I think we end up turning out sameness, right? And we don't want sameness for the future. What we need is diversity of thought. What we need is new ways of thinking about things. And the way we're going to get that is by including more ways of thinking about things. And so, as you know, a lot of my recent work has been around neurodiversity and inclusiveness there. And I just think about, the folks in my life who have ADHD and their incredible imaginations, and how difficult it is for those people to function well, for example, on a team in a traditional course where the participation demands are quite specific. And so their way of expressing their learning, for example, or bringing new ideas in doesn't line up with the way that structure works right now. And so they are left out, and their knowledge and different ways of thinking are excluded because their way of being is different than we have in that sameness box. And so that is one of the things that I love about the work at Royal Roads. And I've said this in a few spaces lately. I don't fit in a lot of places. I have worked in a lot of different settings in post-secondary, including big institutions, research institutions, and they are very rigid for somebody like me. And so coming to Royal Roads, my values-based way of being a learning facilitator is not only accepted, but encouraged. And there are folks, leaders like Elizabeth, who want me to do tinkering things in the course to see how I can make it better. They want me to bring my expertise in neurodiversity to my teaching to include more students. And so I think that is the future, is thinking in those ways of how do we invite this diversity in, and not just invite it in, but once they're in, make them feel welcome and valued. That's where we have to go with education to achieve this future that has better ideas and different ways of doing things, more inclusive ways.
As you're speaking there, Mary, you're reminding me of a journal article I read years ago by Leslie Gurley called, I've just looked it up. Unfortunately, it's not an open access article, how annoying, but I'm pretty sure the Royal Roads Library will have access to it. It's called Student Engagement and the Tyranny of Participation. And it makes the case for quiet thinking time as well as participative, group work, active learning, and, signals maybe a bias towards active modes of participation, and actually that quiet individual thoughtful time is as important and as valid. I'll send you a link to it if nobody else, because I think you will enjoy it. But I think a lot of my work, especially when I was at Athabasca University, and since, has been thinking about exactly that, those students who don't fit the mold. I mean, Athabasca is an open access university. You don't have to have graduated high school to come there. There are no barriers to participation except, unfortunately, money, which is, is a thing. But yeah, the ability to make education accessible. You don't have to sign up for a full degree there. You can sign up for one course and you can figure it out as you go forward and work out if this even is for you. But a lot of the work that I did there and since has also been thinking about validation of prior learning, or prior learning achievement and recognition, as we call it in Canada. How do you get credit for the things you already know? Because certainly in that Athabasca context, a lot of the students were there because for an economic incentive. They're there to get a qualification or a credential because it improves something about their life. And in most cases, it gives them a different set of work opportunities, a different set of earning potentials. And I know we like to think of education, and university education particularly, as this, personally transformative, life enriching space. And I love that it is and can be, but the reality is that students pay quite a lot for access to education, and often they need a payback from that. And I don't think we can, as educators, pretend that that is not the case. There is substantial research in many countries, and I think the most recent CDLRA report says the same thing. Full-time students are probably part-time too, because everybody has to work now to afford education. Everybody is studying and working on the side, or more often the other way around, working and studying on the side. So, in my love fest for Royal Roads, the fact that the program is intentionally designed for working professionals is just a wonderful place to begin. But I would suggest we need to go further, and we need to go further beyond even the design of our courses and thinking about how we include them. How do we allow people to bring what they already know, and not just bring it into the courses that we design and the experiences that we design, but bring it in for credit and get that immediate credit for it, so that you don't repeat what you already know. And then how do we break down the chunks? Courses are still quite a big thing. To your initial point, Elizabeth, how do we think about just in time, and how do we build up what you need over time in a way that still adds up to something coherent? But I think as higher education systems, we have to let go of a little bit of our preciousness about the structure of our courses and our credentials, and not see taking a single course as failure. It might not be. So micro credentials are the buzzwords, but how do we give credit for just enough at just the right time? And how do we demonstrate that that also has value without relying on these big things called certificates or diplomas or degrees? There's a lot of work to be done in that space. And I mean, again, this is a space I'm in the thick of at Commonwealth of Learning, thinking about micro-credential frameworks for the Commonwealth, but thinking about how does this kind of just-in-time learning work at the level of a whole region, and what can it do for economic empowerment and employment opportunities at the level of a whole region? There is, by opening ourselves up to that possibility of change and not letting go of quality assurance, but maybe letting go of structures that are not inclusive, there's a whole wealth of potential out there.
Yes, and I'll just jump in one thing while the two of you read Emily's question in the chat, if you don't mind, because I'd asked if this is your last chance to jump in. And I think what we're really talking about at the core is that values piece, and not the value proposition. I mean, that's an important part too, I think, of people engaging in higher education opportunities. But more importantly, what do we value about education? What are the things that make that something that we're willing to stand by, to fight for, to change old practices, different practices, to innovate, to invent? What is it about that that is so critical? And of course, when you phrase that to people, people can come up with all kinds of things. And then when you take that little litmus list and map it against some of the things and structures that we've created, there's a lot of gaps. And I'm reminded of the work of many people, but George Valencianos and the amazing team at the University of Edinburgh, Jen Ross and Sean Bain, and all their work in speculative futures. And George and I were having a conversation recently, and he said, Elizabeth, the thing is, right? All these structures and systems were made up by other people who were trying to do the best at what they could based on what they knew at the time that they were creating these structures. And we've just kind of kept them alive. And so we don't need to do that anymore, right? We know different things. The context has changed. Our contemporary moment that we're in right now is completely different than it was, even 5 years ago, but 10, 20, 50, 100. So we can change these things and should be changing these things as opposed to being locked in these spaces.
I'll offer a counter to that, Elizabeth. And
Okay.
again, this has been my big learning in the last 5 months since I've been in this role. This moment of complexity and scarcity and disruption is the norm for a vast number of people in the world. We are feeling it in countries that have been historically very stable, but the reality is this has been the norm for many for a long time. So I think there are also lessons we can open ourselves up to. Our norm is not other people's norm. And there's something to be learned from that. And there's something to be learned from the spaces we all sometimes think of as less than and poorer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for adding that, because yeah, I mean, there's so much that we can learn from others that are traveling this path and have traveled it for many times. Thoughts on Emily's question as I watch the time a little bit?
I love Emily's question.
I don't want to dink on corporate learning because I think it's such a broad
Well, here's the
spectrum. But Mary,
fascinating,
go for it.
right? So the other course I teach at Royal Roads is about creating healthy and vibrant organizations. And it is usually filled with organizational development students who are trying to figure out how to do what Emily is talking about. And so, yes, I think many folks are coming to that course and this course about facilitating in those settings as well, with that experience of we are supposed to learn these skills and none of the kind of wrappers around what would make those skills actually flourish, and instead of what context do they exist in, instead of sort of this little tiny you push this button here or here's the script you say. And so I think it is just when they come into either of my courses, they are exposed to a bunch of different ways of thinking about what, for example, makes a healthy organization. What do they think makes a healthy organization? What do the people around them think? And what does the research say? And one of the interesting things that I'm doing right now, because that course starts in January, is looking for alternate models. For example, we were talking about what are we reading? Well, I'm reading Living Indigenous Leadership right now in various ways because I want to bring that lens into how are we talking about organizational development? How are we creating thriving organizations? What are the examples from Indigenous thinking and ways of being and knowing? What are the folks who have expertise in inclusion saying about this? Because that's building out a much rounder picture for people who are in a role of doing this training within corporate culture. And honestly, I'm going to say it's very similar often in academic culture. The wrappers aren't there, right? And to go back to the idea about change management, it's that here's the thing you need to do differently now, and walking away versus who are you? What do you need to support this change? And when the change is done, what will you need to continue to be able to do this change instead of seeing things as a little separate vacuum of skills that you just need to teach to this person, then they're going to be able to do what you want them to do.
I have nothing to add on what, what Mary said there.
Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. I know everyone has a million things to do when the clock strikes 1, but before we finish and turn it back to Ariana, what's your bumper sticker moment for folks that are here today? Or maybe, I mean, you've shared the book already, Mary. Maybe there's another book you want to share. What's a give that we can leave with all of these people who've spent an hour listening very thoughtfully to us and posing great questions?
I don't know that I can come up with it in a pithy statement. I probably should have prepared better for this. I mean, I have another one about technology that is out there about tea bags and technology, which, but I think to pull on that change management thread, it starts and ends with people. It's, you know, the human-centered piece. It's all about people. And I mean, I don't know if this is, I can't quite get this into a pithy statement, but I remember being at a Reclaim conference and we talked about people as infrastructure. We think about technology as infrastructure, but it's people that make things happen. You know, technology exists in these bigger social, cultural, political contexts. It's all people. So start with the people, end with the people, and think about where the technology fits and how it meshes in and how it, you know, it is an entangled, messy place, but start with people.
Yeah. I often go back to, was probably around 2015, I'm going to say, at the Open Education Global Conference in Banff. We were in the big ballroom. There was maybe 500 people in there, and I asked a question. And a few moments later was handed a piece of paper that said heretic. It was a joke. But that's what I say. That's my bumper sticker. Be a heretic. Question everything. There are new ways of thinking about things. There are ways about thinking about things that have been excluded. Be insufferable. I am. People find me insufferable sometimes because I'm a heretic and I won't stop talking about the things that need to change. So, exactly. Just be insufferable. Sometimes I'm even insufferable to myself. Like, really? You have to say that thing again? Well, yes, I do, because the conditions still exist. So I think, yes, be a compassionate heretic. That'd be my tagline.
I love it. I love it. All right, I'm going to put in, so I had shared this with Emery and Mary when we met, but I just finished reading this little book, and it is definitely not my usual genre when I read, but it is a lovely little thought piece, philosophical blend of technology and humans, and speaks to some of what we've been talking about today. So there's a little piece. I also would encourage you, and I'm totally putting my own bias on this, so I'll declare that one of the keynotes that I put in the link above from the Open Ed conference, Adrienne Mari Brown, was phenomenal. And she has written a poem called Ask Questions, and it is lovely. It is just a very powerful poem. So I'll put the link in the chat for that as well. And Ariana, we're going to turn it over to you, or you're never going to get any time. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie and Mary. Ariana, back to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the commitment to time here, Elizabeth. I appreciate it. That was so fantastic to just sit and listen to. So again, thank you so much, Mary and Anne-Marie. It's much appreciated for your time. Of course, to you, Elizabeth, always nice to co-host with you. If you are thinking again of joining us, I just want to mention some key dates for the MA and Graduate Diploma in Learning and Technology. We have an intake coming up in December 23rd, 2025 for March 23rd, 2026 intake. So if you are thinking of joining us, I do want to mention as well, we do have flexible admissions into these programs. So again, we're talking about like prior learning and different things. Something I'm really proud of to speak about Rural Roads in that way. So if you are thinking of coming into the program, you don't necessarily have like all the post-secondary or different things. Again, just because we're almost out of time, I just want to mention that this is all on our website. So if you do have any questions or you want to read through things, those details can be found there. Just a few quick things to note if you are exploring things like financial resources. So anything from like loans, bursaries, scholarships, all those different things. You can again find that at ruralroads.ca. We also have our friends in enrollment services. So again, if you're thinking of enrolling in any of our programs here, learn.more at ruralroads.ca. That's the place to go via email, or we have some phone numbers for local and for toll-free for North America if you want to give them a call. So if you're looking to connect with Elizabeth or other program heads, if you're looking to connect with faculty, maybe students or alumni, they can set you up over there. And again, I'll send a follow-up with all of this information. I'll include all of the resources that we shared today, a lot of great resources in the chat as well. So thank you so much, everybody. Oh, I see current Mallet student. That's amazing. Very glad I'm doing it. That's a great testimonial, I think, to wrap up with. Elizabeth, I just want to pass it off to you one last time if you have any other things to say before we finish off today.
Well, just a very, very warm and authentic and deep thanks to Mary and Anne-Marie for being part of this free-flowing conversation. For all of you who have joined not knowing what you were getting into, that is kind of like doing your master's degree. You just don't know what you're going to get. But thank you. Thank you for being here and for sharing the thinking space with us. For those who watch the recording, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. Thank you very much for watching the recording, if you do, and just wish all of you the very best in the rest of your day and in the week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Morning, everybody.
Take care.